Gin and Tonic Show is a weekly online call-in panel discussion show that focuses on the religion of Islam and related topics. In juxtaposition to the propaganda of Muslim apologists, the far-right, conservative Christians and other parties of disinformants, the Gin and Tonic Show aims to bring a balanced perspective to issues pertaining to Islam by presenting accurate information in order to educate its viewers on Islamic history, scripture, theology and politics. Before I introduce our guest, do you want to quickly do some, latest news kind of stuff? Stop.
The usual spiel. Hello, welcome from me as well. It's been an exciting week. And the best is, alhamdulillah, good news, the Pirelli calendar is out for 2015. Bad news is about 1 billion Muslims will not get to see it. What surprises me is the long list of recipients in the Middle East. Now, just in case you don't know what the Pirelli calendar is, the Pirelli calendar is high-class photography of scantily clad, well-endowed ladies. This is always a hit with people, and apparently in the Middle East too, for some odd reason. What we are talking about is Islam. What we're trying to do, as Klingschor has just so accurately informed us, that we are looking at Islam from an objective point of view. So we look at Islam as a socio-political system, a religion, an ideology, a political ideology, and a worldview, a way of life where the religion is sitting in the middle and determines the other elements, where the political ideology part is being implemented in several regions on this planet today. So based on the interpretation of a book, which we are investigating quite thoroughly here, the Quran, and because the Quran is so vague and ambiguous, the interpretation of secondary texts, the Sunnah. So this is what we're all about, explain Islam and its contents and its importance in the world today. Like, for example, how does Islam affect Australia? Well, the Australian-based Walk Free Foundation has released their Global Slavery Index for 2014 so far. Now, they estimate that something like 23.5 million men, women, and children are enslaved in Asia Pacific. Now, if you go across to Africa as well, the highest is something like the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. The second highest is Uzbekistan, the location of one of the oldest parts of the Quran, in Tashkent. And in the top 10, for some odd reason, they're all Muslim majority countries, except Haiti, that is. So
I thought India was number one.
Okay, not according to them. No, hang on. I'm not talking about absolute numbers. I'm talking about percentage of population. So India is the top number in the absolute numbers, but not in the percentage of the population. And there's in Indonesia, you have 3/4 million. A lot. I mean, that's amazing. If you think about it.
What's a slave though? It's an important question to know what the correct is a factory worker in China a slave if he gets locked into the factory all day and has to work, with no rights essentially.
No rights, no income.
What criteria are they? Do they mean literally chattel slavery, like people owning other people?
You can't quit.
Okay, because it might be. I mean, this might be sound callous, but I think that there are degrees or levels of slavery. So at the very bottom, you'd have your manual labor slaves who like cotton slaves, for example, and then above that you'd have domestic slaves, people who would work in your house and so to give it some historical context, right? The sort of slaves in the American South, for example, in the cotton fields. So there's those manual labor slaves, or in medieval Mesopotamia in the south, and Sawad or whatever, southern Iraq. They had plantation slaves, or where they worked on the salt marshes, or some sort of agricultural or working slaves down there. And then you have domestic slaves. So in the medieval Middle East, in the Bible, the kind of slavery that's usually talked about here is domestic slavery. So this is people who work in your house, your servants, people who do the chores, do the cooking, that kind of stuff. And then on top, above that, I would say that you'd have, I don't know, maybe indentured servants, and then you'd have lower class people or workers who are devoid of choice. So they're not legally owned, but they are kind of coerced. There's like degrees of coercion, degrees of ownership. Does that make sense? What do you think of that? Do you think that?
No, I don't think it makes any sense, because it doesn't matter to me whether you work as a cotton picker or as a sex slave. You are coerced into doing something. You cannot walk free. You cannot leave this job. You only get food, and this is it. You don't. If you get sick and you die, that's it. Tough shit. Tough tacky. You're gone. You don't have any rights. You can't say, okay, I would like, my mother's sick and I need to look after her. I need 3 days off. You don't get that. And so for me, it doesn't matter whether you're working inside the house or whether you're working on the field. This is a personal predisposition, I would imagine, that somebody who's more strong will be able to work in the fields, and somebody who's not will not. But I don't see any difference in a level. Either you have a free, expression, free will, free everything, that you can walk free, or you cannot. And for me, no degree. I understand what you're doing, and yes, I understand the levels, and I understand the classification that you're doing. But from a humane point of view, no, I don't see any difference.
Anyway, sorry, I interrupted. Continue.
No, okay. Okay, we're going to stay in Indonesia a bit, because Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, has a new mayor. The problem is that in this country, where more Muslims live than in any other country in the world, he's a Christian. Now, a lot of people don't really understand how Islam works. That the Islam in Malaysia or Indonesia is a completely different Islam than what you get in Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia, which is completely different again to the Islam that you get in Morocco. This is something that people need to understand, that there is no such thing as the Islam. Now, in Indonesia, for example, they have a country which is governed by secular laws. All right, they have laws which say, no, you don't need to be a Muslim to have an official position, which is the case in Iran or in other countries. In Morocco, they've now, or Tunisia, they've started splitting it completely. Like, women's rights there are now anti-Quran. So it no longer says that the man is a degree above the woman. They've changed it. Now they have the same rights. So even though it's called Islam, it's no longer the Islam, the fundamentalist and conservative Islam that we know from the Quran. So they have now a mayor, but because we still have conservative Muslims, this doesn't always work. Because these Muslims went apeshit, insisting that the capital with I mean, this is 12 million people, right? It should be run by a Muslim. Why? Nobody knows. But they staged street protests and like what we know from the old days. They're not protesting Daesh or enslaving of girls by their fellow Muslims, but a Christian mayor. This is a higher priority for some Muslims in Indonesia. Absolutely amazing. Now, if you travel like 100 k's east, you get to an area where you have different rituals, which are all around sex. Performing ritualistic sex. I mean, in Islam, everything is regulated, okay? Everything is a ritual. Never mind whether you go to the toilet or how you cook or how you eat or even how you drink a glass of water. Everything's a ritual. So they have rituals for sex as well. And this is how... Actually, I should take this serious, because this is a very serious issue. It's all about money. It's all about influence. It's all about cleansing yourself in a spiritual way, because you need to have sex in a specific way, a specific number of times with strangers on a sex mountain. And this is supposed to cleanse your soul and open your mind for new opportunities and bring good fortune. And pilgrims should come here with pure hearts and clean bodies. A gatekeeper said. And you can see this on it's called Sex Mountain. Everybody knows Sex Mountain in Indonesia. It's in the middle of Java. So sometimes being a Muslim does have its advantages. And what is an important criteria for being a cop in Indonesia? Is it education? Is it wit? Is it intelligence? Is it logics? No, it's virginity. Female recruits are tested, and they call this using a two-finger hymen test to check their virginity. This is what they have to do before they're allowed to be a policeman. And Human Rights Watch, I mean, this is a company, right? Human Rights Watch, that's what they're called. and they protested this practice, and they were blown off. And the Indonesians said, look, this is our internal affairs, and how we determine the criteria necessary for a woman to be a policeman is our thing, and we are checking their hymens. So there you go. And, I mean, you know that I don't go into this whole Daesh and cutthroat and who is killing how many. I mean, you read this every day, that they just line up people and just go and they shoot. But they apparently... they have no limits when it comes to brutality and primitive immoral actions, really. Is this what Islam does to people? There are now songs being composed, recorded, and played in the Palestine region. And they praise Muslims driving their cars into groups of Israelis. And this cowardly act is then glorified and Israelis are mocked. What is happening on this planet? I mean, there's so many gods. Why aren't they doing anything? I get so pissed off when I see these things or hear about these things. But there's also better news, okay? A girl married a prominent Muslim, and he went to war and she followed, realized that she wanted out, and she couldn't because now the people didn't want her to leave anymore. And then the mother flew in, and they fled to Turkey together, and then they went back to Holland. And the girl is now in court where they're investigating whether someone joining a terrorist organization in another country but not committing a crime can be prosecuted. So this is quite interesting what the Dutch courts are going to find with this girl, who is now safely back where she wants to be. She hasn't really done anything wrong, but she just joined Daesh. So this is going to be interesting to follow. Now, last time we talked about female genital mutilation, and Klingschor delivered some detailed insights. And it's rampant in Egypt, where somebody now estimated that 90% of the women in the country have undergone some sort of a procedure, misguidedly called circumcision. And as children, out of the belief that it controls women's sexuality. So the children are already, treated, and then they think that this is good. And the United Nations says the practice is concentrated in 29 countries in Africa and the Middle East. And people are still saying it has nothing to do with Islam. This is bullshit. Now, Egypt's government criminalized the practice like 6 years ago. And religious leaders have declared it dangerous and without any spiritual justification. But it is still widespread, and it doesn't look like it's going to go away in the next couple of decades. Now, well, the only thing that you can do is this widespread delivery of information. And it seems that this horrific crime is starting to decrease, and women can remain intact in future. I mean, if they want cosmetic surgery, it's then up to them, okay, but not some cleric. And all we need now is to stop performing the same thing in the heads of people, so we can all decide ourselves whom we make love to and how. So. And on a lighter note, Lebanese singer Haifa went on stage. I don't know, Haifa, I think everybody who's got anything to do with Arabian culture will know her. She's a bit of a controversial figure, and she went on stage to sing an Arabic pop number, and now has finally managed to cause outrage and shock and scandal because she was dressed head to toe, covered, but the dress in some parts was only sheer lace, allowing viewers to verify that she did indeed have legs and arms and pieces of the bum because they were clearly visible. But she does have all these things like most humans on this planet does. So, and it wouldn't have raised an eyebrow in Korea, Brazil, or Russia or whatever, but in the Arabic world it was considered something like heresy. And these are the problems conservative Muslims waste their time on. Don't we have more serious issues to solve? Did you hear about the Saudi sheikh who went to his third wedding? And when he saw her face for the first time, went back inside and filed for a divorce? Because he never saw his bride. And then when they got married, he saw the face and he says, no, I need to go back. I need to divorce you. This is not what I bought.
Wow, that's kind of horrifying.
Because he believed the uncle, and he said she was beautiful, but the uncle lied. But he got to keep the dowry, so he's just into it for the money. And the guy tried to get married and then said, oops, look, that's not it, cheers. Okay, and finally, does anyone remember I had a running in with an apologist who spends time in Hyde Park? He's another Nadia Ahmed, clueless, ignorant, and crafty. Anyway, to cool him off, I challenged him to come on the Gin and Tonic show. And he seemed to agree with this. And then maybe after watching a few episodes, he ran away and just cried, like so many people. There's so many cowards out there. Now, for some odd reason, he's agreed to do a one-on-one with the rationalizer. I don't know, for some reason. And he did this. And unfortunately, this has to be postponed. I don't know why. He just said, listen, can you just mention that it has to be postponed until the 19th of December. I don't know for what reason. He didn't tell me, and I'm not going to ask. It's none of my business, so it's just, that's it. So I suppose further details will be forthcoming. Because I'm looking forward to this. The same thing as as soon as the video is going to be released between Hamza Tzortzis and Arif Ahmed. This should be quite interesting. But it seems that Hamza's toned down, all right? He doesn't make all these wild claims anymore. But what he does now is he's looking for the philosophical side. I mean, he doesn't understand anything about philosophy. I don't understand what he's trying to do. But he's bragging that how many sessions in philosophy he's had with how many brilliant professors and all that. So we'll see how that pans out. Okay, take it away.
All right. Our topic today will be, I guess, Sassanid Persia or Sassanid Iran. And to talk about this, we are joined by Nadeem, also known as Mihran Khorasan Sparbed on Facebook, who's a sort of autodidactic aficionado on the culture of Sassanid Persia. Would that be about right?
Yeah, that's pretty much about right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're just gonna have like a brief overview of, say, Sassanid history.
What
some
is
of the
Sassanid?
So the Sassanid. Well, you know what? Let's just get straight into it. Who are the Sassanids? What are they?
Sassanians. Well, the Sassanians were the last Iranian dynasty to rule the Middle East, Central Asia, Afghanistan, all that area, before the coming of the Arabs in the 7th century. They rose to prominence in the 3rd century AD. They rebelled against the Arsacid dynasty, who had previously wrestled Iran back from the Hellenistic Seleucids.
The Parthians.
Yeah, they're called Parthians. Parthians is an ethnicity, so we still have Parthian clans, Parthian houses in the Sasanian period. The Arsacids were the main noble house during the quote-unquote Parthian period, as such. So it's the Arsacid dynasty who were Parthians. And then after that you have the Sasanian dynasty who were Persians, but under the Sasanians you still had various Parthian houses. Not the Arsacids anymore. They either all went extinct or fled to Armenia or Central Asia. But you had other noble houses, and they become very important in the late Sasanian period, which we'll get onto in due course.
But Nadeem, this was all about territory and power struggle.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, the Sasanians revolted against the Arsacids, against the Parthians in the 3rd century, conquered their empire, spread eastwards into the Kushan territories and conquered all that. Went westwards a bit, beat up the Romans every now and again. Things were kind of at a status quo until the 5th centuries onwards, where you have a series of nomadic Central Asian incursions into the northeastern provinces, starting with the Khidarites, who quickly themselves became Kushanized, and you can see that by their coinage. Their coinage is almost identical to the later Kushans. After that you have the Kionites, the Nezak Huns, and last of all is the Hephthalites, who are kind of the most badassiest of them all. They actually kill they kill a Sasanian emperor in battle. It was Peroz. They're finally the Hephthalites are finally defeated by an alliance between the Sasanian Khosrow I and the Gökturks, who are kind of appearing in the middle of the 6th century. The Hephthalites don't become extinct. They have various successor kingdoms in Afghanistan who kind of hold their own against the Arabs until the 9th or 10th centuries. But they're vastly reduced in power and kind of become client states to either the Turks in the north or the Sasanians in the south. The border was essentially the Oxus River, The Sasanians were never really able to go much further north than that, and likewise the Turks never really got much further south than that.
And with the Hephthalites, what was their ethnicity or culture? Were they Iranian or were they Turkish?
That is very much debated. The answer is no one really knows. There are scholars who support an Iranian ethnicity. There are some who propose a Turkic or Hunnic ethnicity. It's not very clear, just based on what we know about them, which actually is not very much. We have a handful of coins. We have the occasional written source from a Roman author, but other than that, there is very little coming out the ground from the Hephthalites.
Mm. Okay, so before we proceed, just a bit of quick general sort of geographical background. Can you describe the world that the Sassanids were living in terms of the Mediterranean and Middle East theater? Who was living where? What's the sort of the milieu? What's the context for this in late antiquity?
Okay, so we start off in the 3rd century. In the 3rd century, at the start of the 3rd century, we still have one Roman Empire, which extends from Syria to Britain and Spain and North Africa. And I'm sure everybody knows the Roman Empire and how big they were. They kind of get messed around a bit in the 3rd century. The first two Sasanian kings, Ardashir and Shapur, launched numerous raids and invasions into Roman territory, eventually bringing about somewhat of an economic collapse. The Romans split into two later on. You have the Eastern Roman Empire, which lasts until 1453, and the Western Roman Empire, which falls sometime during the 5th century to the various barbarian tribes in Western Europe. So that's what's going on in Europe. In the Caucasus, you have Armenia, which is sort of, kind of, not really an independent state at the start, and then later on just becomes split between the Romans and the Sasanians. In northern Iran, what's now Gilan, Mazandaran, you have the Daylamis. They're again a kind of independent, not really kind of tribe they swear fealty to the Sasanian kings, but are kind of not really a fully incorporated people into the empire. And then in Arabia, you have the two main Arab tribes were the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. The Lakhmids with their capital at Al-Hira, near Ctesiphon, and they were sort of a client state of the Sasanians. And you had the Ghassanids further west, who were kind of a client state of the Romans. And you had a lot of proxy warfare between the Sasanians and the Romans going via these Arab states. Further south in Arabia, you have Yemen, which later on became a Sasanian sort of client state, and then you get into Ethiopia and Aksum, which again are they're Roman states. They're Christian. They're essentially Roman satellites. In the east, I've already alluded to the Kushans, who are probably one of the most overlooked and probably one of the most important states of late antiquity. They influence a lot of royal iconography, a lot of art forms in the Sasanian, the Islamic, the Indian, and the Central Asian Chinese world. The Kushans are, of course, destroyed in the third century from the west, and in the 4th century from the southeast by the Guptas, who take over. They last a couple of centuries, and then you have a massive sort of conglomeration of post-Gupta states, the most important being the empire of Harshavardhana in the 6th and 7th centuries. Kashmir sort of retains its independence under the Kamboja dynasty during this period. And of course, northeast of Iran, you have all the various Central Asian tribes, the Khidarites, Hephthalites, Nezak Khans, Al Khans. I've alluded to them already, and then later on you get the Turks. So that's kind of whom we've got surrounding the Sasanians in late antiquity.
These are the actors on the stage.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just before we continue as well, what's the difference between doing a little bit of research on I guess you might say ethnicity and language and all that kind of stuff, and it's quite interesting. And I discovered interestingly that there seems to be a difference between Iranian and Persian. It seems like Persian is a subset of Iranian. So you have Iranian languages. So Kurdish is an Iranian language, and Persian is an Iranian language. So they're not actually synonyms. Is that true, or what?
Yeah, that's completely correct. In terms of ethnicity and language, yeah, Iranian is a big class that consists of, say, Ossetian and Tajiki and Dari and various other like little tribal languages, and Persian or Farsi is one of them. It's kind of the most common one, but it's not the only one by any stretch of the imagination. And it's a similar thing with ethnicity. In late antiquity, we have the northern Iranians, who are kind of the Scythians and the Sarmatians, the Alans, who are more prominent in the European sphere, and you have the southerners, who are, the Persians and the Parthians and those guys.
Yeah, interesting. And so, of the Persian subset of the Iranian languages, there are 3 dialects of Persian currently spoken. Is that right? Is Tajiki, which is in Tajikistan amongst the Tajikis, Dari, which is spoken in Afghanistan, and Farsi, which is spoken in Iran.
Yeah, that's right.
Are these all of them? These are 3 dialects of Persian, which itself is a sub-language within the Iranian languages. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So these 3 languages are pretty much mutually intelligible. Obviously, Tajiki is written with the Cyrillic alphabet, I believe, but other than that, they're all pretty much intelligible. So a Farsi speaker can understand Tajiki spoken, but neither of them can really understand Yaghnobi or Kurdish or something. There are going to be words which are similar, obviously, but the sentence structure and everything will be different.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so I'll just look at some of my notes. Okay, so we've had a kind of an overview of Sassanid history. We've got kind of a feel for the context. What were some of the factors behind the fall of the Sassanid dynasty? How did they end?
Right. This is my favorite period, so I may go on a little bit. The decline of the Sassanians, in my opinion, starts with the reforms of Khosrow I in the middle of the 6th century. And what he did is, before his rule, we got to understand, we had a massive Hephthalite incursion. We had the Mazdakites, who were kind of the proto-communists, I guess that's one way of putting it, who tried to wrestle power from the noble lords and give it all back to the poor people. We had them, and then we have this guy who comes in, and stuff's been really messed around, and he tries to implement a series of reforms. There's a military reform, and then there's a tax and civic reform. And what happens is power is taken away from the great Agnatic clans, the great Parthian and Persian noble houses, and it's given to some of the minor landowners who themselves are loyal to the crown and not to the great feudal lords. I mean, the Arsacid and Sasanian periods have been compared to medieval Europe in the feudal structure. There were some nuanced differences, but overall you have a similar sort of thing where you've got a king on top, and then underneath him you've got a series of noble lords, each with their own interests and each with their own private armies and each with their own private economies and things like that. So we get some of the power taken away from the noble lords and put in the hands of these smaller landowners who are loyal to the king. Okay, so things kind of go fairly swimmingly for a while. We get more efficient taxation, we get a better military, and then we have a campaign against the Turks, led by, well, during the reign of Hormuzd the 4th or the 5th, I forget. We have hundreds of Hormuzds, so they all kind of the same. But it's in the late 6th century, and his main general is a guy called Bahram Chobin, who comes from the city of Rai, which is near modern-day Tehran, and he is from the Parthian house of Mihran. The Mihrans are probably one of the most important noble houses in late Sasanian history, and we'll talk about them in a bit more detail during the actual decline. But Bahram Chobin leads a campaign northeast to defeat the Turks and the Hephthalites in battle, and he does this, no problem. But then there's some disagreement between him and Hormuzd about, glory and who should be getting land and titles and things, and different sources paint it differently. But what happens is essentially Bahram Chobin leads a revolt against Hormuzd, saying, I'm a Parthian, I am the rightful king. We need to oust the Persian Sasanians and re-implement the Parthian Parthian dynasts. He himself was a Mihran. It's not clear if the Mihrans were descended from the Arsacids, who were the previous dynasty who had been ousted. They may have been, they may not have been. The Mihrans don't appear in any sources prior to the 3rd and 4th centuries, whereas the other noble houses like the Karans and the Surans do. But anyway, so the Mihrans, the Bahram Chobin leads a rebellion against Hormuzd, captures Ctesiphon, implements his own rule for a couple of years, and then is finally ousted by Khosrow Parviz, the probably one of the most charismatic kings of late antiquity, in the beginning of the late 6th, 7th century. Khosrow II, Khosrow Parviz, same guy, he gets the support of the Romans and ousts Bahram Chobin. And here we have really the first interruption of Sasanian rule from the start of the dynasty. It's a sign of increasing friction between the noble houses and the king. Khosrow Parviz, I mean, no one can really say the first few decades of his rule were in decline. The guy manages to overrun all of Anatolia and all of Egypt and all of the Levant during his conquest of the Roman Empire. Again, here's where things get interesting. His main generals, Shahwaraz, Shahraplakan, and Shahin. Shahwaraz is, again, he's a Mihran from the Mihran family, and he's the main guy involved in conquering Anatolia. He gets outside Constantinople. He's obviously on the other side of the sea, so he can't really do a great deal. But the Byzantines, they're really scared for their lives. Heraclius is fighting a campaign against the Persian armies in sort of the Caucasus, Armenia, northern Mesopotamia at this point. But he's very good at forging letters, and what he does is he forges a letter to Shahwaraz saying, "The king Khosrow Parviz is trying to kill you." It may have been a forgery, it may not have been. I think the current thought is that it was a forgery. But he presents this letter to Shahwaraz, and Shahwaraz goes, "I'm not having any of this. I'm a Parthian. I'm a Mihran. He doesn't have any right to rule, and Khosrow Parviz is not a very nice guy, so I'm going to lead a revolt." What Heraclius does is neutralizes his own major opponent, and then Shahwaraz retreats from Constantinople, stations in what's now Syria, northern Syria, and then from that point he's poised to either attack Khosrow Parviz in Ctesiphon or the Romans. He can change his mind at any point. He decides to make a bid for the throne, goes in there, lasts a year or two, and then is ousted by various other dynasts. We have the major houses in play during this period are the Mihrans, who we've already had two major players.
Wait. Was he successful? Did he successfully take over the throne?
Yeah, he did for like a year.
And then he was overthrown by someone else, who was then overthrown by someone else. So is this the period of political instability with a lot of kings in a short period of time?
That's right. It's very messy, and all the different histories give different lists of kings and everything.
Yeah. And just to quickly clarify for viewers an interesting point, when Nadeem was talking about the invasion of the Persian invasion and occupation of the Levant, of Syria and what is now Israel and Palestine, and Anatolia, modern-day Turkey and Egypt. This is supposedly what is referred to in the Quran, in Surah Arum, I think Surah 30, when it talks about how the Romans will defeat the Persians in the lowest land, or the nearest land, is a better is the actual proper what it's actually saying. And so this is allegedly what it's referring to. So the nearest land is supposed to be Jerusalem or the Levant, and the Persians have just conquered. So that's the historical context, supposedly, for that verse, since it's quite a notable verse that people often use to try and prove prophecy. So I thought I'd just point that out. Okay, so he tried to conquer the Roman Empire, but the Romans managed to, through some means, maybe through guile, managed to repel the Persian invasion, and the Persian general returns home, takes the throne, but then a period of chaos and instability follows, and there are lots of kings.
That's right. Yeah, we have the two major houses. We have three main houses in late antiquity, but the two major houses making bids for the throne are the Mihrans and the Ispahdans, who really, really, really do not get on well with each other, despite both being Parthians. The Ispahdans are based in western Iran and Khorasan, to an extent as well. The Sasanians themselves, during King Yazdegerd's flight from Ctesiphon, he's escorted by a certain Ispahan general. They get kind of somewhere into Sistan, and then they decide to part ways. Yazdegerd goes east to Marv, where he is assassinated, and then the Ispahan general goes west to Rey, the capital of the Mitrans, where he joins forces with the besieging Arab army and sort of captures Rey. He then goes north into Tabaristan and sort of forms his own little independent dynasty there. But yeah, no, we've got this period of instability, kings and queens lasting like a year or a couple of years, and not really a great deal happening. During the actual conquest of Iran, we had the two. We have two factions. They're two generals. They're still feuding right up until the day before the Battle of Qadisiyah, and so we really can't establish any effective command among the Sasanian army. The Battle of Qadisiyah is a complete disaster for the Sasanians, and later on, again at Nahavand, it's again a massive defeat. The Arabs.
So to quickly clarify, the Battle of Qadisiyah is the big battle where the the Persians and the Arabs fought. The Arabs of Umar bin al-Khattab, I think. Is this supposedly under the Caliphate of Umar?
Yeah, it's pretty early. I'm not that well versed in Arab history, but I think it's around that sort of time.
Let me just make sure. Yes, this is during the early reign of Umar bin al-Khattab, supposedly the second of the righteously guarded caliphs, as they are so called in later Muslim historiography. And so this is seen as symbolically the big defeat. With the defeat of the Persians at Qadisiyah, the way is now open to conquer Iran, which is then occupied by the Arabs and colonized and taken over. So this is the seminal, seen as the seminal event.
Yeah, and
so
I think
what happens next?
Seen as is a pretty appropriate way of putting it. It certainly wasn't the end all and be all, but it sort of entered folklore. I think probably with the Shahnameh and various other semi-historical works. Yeah. Yeah, you have.
Okay, so what happened next?
You have the Battle of Qadisiyah, you have the Battle of Nahavand, and that's kind of the end for the Sasanian. Well, it's the end for a while for the Sasanian dynasty. They make a slight re-emergence in a couple of decades. What you end up next is you have the Arabs controlling Western Iran, and you have various Iranian dynasts, each with their own vested interest, controlling most of the Iranian plateau and parts of Central Asia. And you have the Qarans, who are the third main player. The Qarans, who are based in Tabaristan, you have the Ispahan, and you have the Mihrans, all of which hate each other's guts and will ally with the Arabs to win over the other, which is what happens at Rai, and it's what happens in the Caucasus as well. You have Arab armies kind of being used by these dynasts to win over other dynasts, with the end result only being that the Arabs really retain control. The early Arabs, they used a lot of Iranian troops in their armies. The Iranian soldiers were called Hamra or Reds. Maybe a reference to the red color of their clothing. And a lot of early conversions took place where Sasanian soldiers would be able to. Sorry, they were given land, they were given money in exchange for military service and a conversion. A similar thing happens in Central Asia a couple of centuries later, where you have mass conversions of the Sogdians in order to avoid things like the jizya. The governor of Transoxiana, this is the 8th century, just to fast forward. It's a funny anecdote. Yeah. The governor of Transoxiana, he gets a little curious as to why his tax revenue isn't really what it should be, and he says, let's inspect these guys for if they're circumcised, and the result is a mass
This is the story from Tabari.
Yeah.
And this is El Jarrah, the general, and he sends to Umar bin Abdulaziz, the second Umar, the Umayyad, he complains to Umar, and he says all these people are converting just to escape the jizya. We should tell them they have to get circumcised, or else they can't convert. Is that the same?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, and then Umar says, God sent Muhammad to be, a messenger or something, not a circumciser. So, fortunately, there was no need to circumcise in order to join. So yeah, that's interesting. It demonstrates something important if there's any historical reliability to the tradition, because it is from much later, from Tabari, not contemporaneous. But it would maybe give some credence to the idea that a lot of people were converting, maybe not for, I don't know, legitimate spiritual needs, but rather to escape, I don't know, tax.
That's right. That seems to happen quite a lot in history, to be honest. I mean, there's these two examples of the Sasanian soldiers and the Sogdians, and then there's this other famous example of, I think it was the Rus or some sort of steppe Russian tribe. They had to decide between Christianity and Islam, and they picked Christianity because they liked their alcohol too much. And that was that.
Oh, there's another one. Was it the Russians did something like that, where they sent out. This is probably apocryphal, but the legend goes that they sent out emissaries to different lands, and some went to German Europe or Germanic Europe or whatever, and they found it too somber. And then they went to Muslim lands, and they didn't like the prohibition on alcohol. And then they went to Constantinople, and they loved the architecture, and they could drink alcohol. So it was. So they end up converting to Orthodox Christianity. I think that's how the story goes. It's pretty interesting. So it might be it's either it's the same story, or maybe there's variations of similar stories floating there. Pretty interesting, though.
Yeah, it is interesting to see that religion wasn't really that highly regarded by a lot, some people at least. Obviously, the priests were they would be, regarding it in the highest esteem, but your average person were probably like, yeah, I'll convert, just leave me alone.
Yeah. Okay, so what happens next? These Arabs have invaded. They've taken advantage, or been lucky enough to invade at a time when, well, I imagine Persia falling apart is the necessary pretext for the Arabs to be able to invade with any success in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, if the invasion had taken
previous Arab invasions, right? There had been previous Arab invasions in the prior centuries.
There had been the odd raid, yes, and the most important one takes place during the rule, or shortly before the rule of Shapur II in the 4th century. He's known as Shapur Zul Atkaf or something like that in Arabic. He launched a massive invasion of Arabia and captured a bunch of Arab prisoners, and he pierced them all through the shoulder and paraded them back, which is kind of brutal. But yeah, that's right. We have diplomatic relations between the Arabs and the Persians as far back as the Achaemenid period. But in the Sasanian dynasty, Bahram Gur was educated by the Arabs. He lived among them before becoming a king. We have Arab commanders at the Battle of Kalinicum against the Byzantines in the late 6th century, called Al-Mundir or something like that. These names, all these names sound very, very similar, and it's hard to keep track of who's who without massive spreadsheets and webs kind of plastered all over your wall. But, yeah.
And so in northeastern Arabia, bordering Mesopotamia, there was a Arab kingdom called Lachem, or state or polity.
Yeah.
The Lachmids. And they were Persian, a proxy for the Persians, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. They were a proxy, but they were annexed in the 6th century. So instead of being like just a satellite state, they become a fully fledged part of the Sasanian kingdom in the 6th century. Okay. Maybe not a good idea, because you got rid of your buffer zone between the Sasanians and the invading Arabs in the 7th century. But with hindsight, I suppose.
Okay, and so what happens next then? So the empire has crumbled. all these local Persian or Iranian aristocrats collaborate with the Arabs against each other. And is it correct that the Arabs end up ruling, because the Arabs, there aren't that many of them, and they end up being clustered in typically in these colonies like Basra and Kufa and Fustat, and I think Mar. Do they set up do they colonize Mar or Ray? Where in Iran do the Arabs settle?
So Marv was a pretty important border city, a fortress city in the Sasanian period. It was the main stronghold against the Turks and the Hephthalites. There were Arab settlements in and around Marv, of course, but they tended to be mainly in the southwest, the parts closer to the Arabian Peninsula.
Do you mean Iraq? Like the what is it called? Iraq al-Ajam?
Yeah.
Or Iraq Ajam or something. So there's the word Iraq. There's two Iraqs. There's Iraq Arab or Arabi, which is modern day southern Iraq, the country Iraq now, and then there was the Iraq over the Zagros Mountains, which is Persian Iraq. Right. Yeah, so they are also called, I think, Jibal later on. This is basically synonymous with the region of Jibal. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Arabs remain.
And also Media. Is that right? The Media
is further. No, Media is
further
a
north.
very old word, but it's kind of Armenia, Gilan, Zagros, that kind of area.
Okay, so the border of the Caspian Sea. So that's a bit too far north then for what I'm referring to. Okay, so the Arabs are mostly on those. Would you call it a fertile plain, or a
I suppose the Fertile Crescent is it's that area, Mesopotamia really.
Yeah, and so they don't really settle heavily anywhere else. They're mostly concentrated in that region.
No, that's right. You still have large Iranian populations in most of Iran and parts of Central Asia, and of course you're getting, the further northeast you go, the more Turkified you go as well. So you have large Turkic populations in various Sogdian states as well.
Interesting. Okay, and so what happens next? What's the next step historically?
Okay.
The Arabs have taken over. What happens next?
Okay, so let's keep track of the four main houses. You've got the Sasanians, you've got the Mihrans, you've got the Isfahan, you've got the Korans. So let's talk about the Sasanians first. The Yazdegerd is assassinated at Marv by a farmer, possibly operating under Hephthalite instruction. There was a conspiracy by two Hephthalite kings to assassinate the Persian Shahanshah and take power for themselves. That didn't really happen. The Hephthalites didn't gain much ground. But anyway, his descendants go east. They go to the Tang Dynasty court, where they're received. They're acknowledged as the true kings of Persia, and they're given some military assistance. They go west and launch what are ultimately unsuccessful attempts at reconquering Iran. One of the Persian kings gets set up in Sistan. Remember, Sistan, Eastern Iran, Afghanistan, were under the Tang Dynasty. These were Hephthalite successor states under the protection of the Tang Dynasty. So they were kind of Chinese vassals, not
interesting.
Yeah, after
this is the Arabic Sijistan, correct?
Sistan is kind of that area bordering India. It's in the southeast of Iran.
Is Sistan what the Arabs called Sijistan?
It may well have been.
I'm pretty sure.
Yes, it's Sijistan in Arabic and Sakastan in Persian.
Yes, yeah, and this is actually, I was going to say a notable person in the history of Islam who is from Sijistan, but I don't want to jump ahead to Persian influences on Islam. So we'll keep that in. Just keep this in mind. Someone notable is from Sijistan.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Okay. anyway, keep going. Sorry.
So yeah, the House of Sasan established itself in Sijistan, Sakastan, whatever you want to call it, for a couple of years, I guess. They kind of just disappear. We know about them from their coins, not from any written records, really. The House of Mihran disappears for a couple of centuries. With their last main notable person is a guy called Siavash, who was the governor of Rai at the time when the Ispahadan general leaves the king Yazdegerd, goes west and joins the Arabs to conquer Rai, the city. They reappear in the 10th century as the Samanids, who claim descent from the Mihrans. The Samanids, they ruled in the 10th century. They are kind of famous for really bringing about a rebirth of Iranian culture in Central Asia and in Iran. And their artwork is super, super cool. Anybody interested should just go to Google Images and search for Samanid, like Samanid plates or Samanid artwork, and you have some of the coolest sort of modern abstract art, I suppose is the best way to put it. Try interpreting that for iconography. Anyway, the two other houses, you have the Ispahadan and the Qarans, and they both established themselves in Tabaristan, which, due to its terrain, it's kind of separated from the rest of Iran by a series of mountains. It retains some independence for several centuries. It's not entirely clear which house falls first and when and by which mechanism, but certainly by the 10th century we're now talking about the Buyids, who are a separate dynasty, who oddly enough claim descent.
Shiites.
Yeah, and these guys are interesting because they claim descent from the house of Sasan. In the 10th century we start seeing some re-emergence of the Parthian-Persian rivalry. You have the Samanids, who are Mihrans, and they were Sunnis, and then you have the Buyids, who were claimed to be descended from the Sasanians, and who were Shias, and they again really do not get on very well with each other. So it's interesting to see.
It's amazing how those. Yeah, exactly.
These old patterns that are now a millennium old. These patterns of Persian-Parthian rivalry date from the Arsacid period. They're still visible in the 10th century.
Amazing. So what, in terms of, say, the in terms of the cultural or political or ideological impacts, can we detect the Sassanids or the Persians more generally within Islam after the fall, or Muslim culture, let's say, after the fall of the Sassanid dynasty and the Arab conquest? You've already touched upon some of it with the what is it, the Buyids, or I thought they're called Buwayhids or something as well. They seem to be.
Yeah, it's two names for the same people.
Yeah. So that with their recourse to Sassani heritage, the Samanids with their sort of Persian influenced art and architecture, would you say?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm primarily an art historian, so I can talk at length about that. So in terms of art styles, yeah, you have a direct continuation of Sasanian art forms from the end of the dynasty until the Seljuk invasions. The artistic canon is kind of loosened, so you see some conventions that were pretty much never sort of, left, never. What's the word?
Abandoned?
That's the one, yeah. Some conventions that were never abandoned during Sasanian canonical art start to be a bit loosened during the post-Sasanian period. But essentially, this entire art period isn't called Umayyad art or Samanid art or Buyid art. It's called post-Sasanian art because it is a continuation of Sasanian art, just with some conventions a little loosened. In terms of clothing, so the early Arabs, when they were living in the Arabian Peninsula, seemed to be more heavily influenced by Roman dress, which, granted, is not saying much, seeing as the Romans at the time were pretty heavily influenced by Iranian dress. But at the early Umayyad palaces of Qasr al-Ghair al-Harbi and Khirbat al-Mafjar, we still see Sasanian art form, still see Sasanian dress, Sasanian equipment and things in the hunting scenes. There are a few depictions of the early Umayyad military, which again show something very, very similar to your late Sasanian warriors. An example is, again, I think it's Khirbat al-Mafjar. There's a painting there showing two armored warriors, and one of them wears pretty much a direct carbon copy of basically the helmet you're seeing me wearing, essentially. You see this again reflected in coinage. Arab Sasanian coins, it's very, very difficult to tell the difference between an Arab Sasanian coin and a late Sasanian coin based on the aesthetics alone. Obviously, one of them has Arabic inscriptions, one of them has Middle Persian inscriptions, but even some Arab Sasanian coins have Middle Persian inscriptions, so it's not an absolute cut and dry rule. The crowns still have the wings and the crescent moons and the crenellations and everything. There's a very interesting coin I posted online of Yazid ibn al-Muhallab from the 7th century, and in terms of military history, this guy's really important because he's one of the only coins showing military equipment. And again, we're seeing what is essentially Sasanian armor on his coin, and a Sasanian helmet, Sasanian crown, with all the heraldic features you would expect of Khosrow Parviz or Khosrow Anushirvan or Bahram Gursh seen on the coins. Coins in Tabaristan are again pretty similar. They become a little more abstractified, where the face is removed and replaced with a diamond and various geometric shapes. But it's not until the Abbasid period that we start seeing the typical Islamic coins without faces and with just Arabic inscriptions on. Architecture, well, the two main Sasanian contributions to architecture were the Ivans and the domes, and I can't think of a single mosque that doesn't really have these features. The big
Interesting
archway at the front, and obviously a dome. Yeah.
So this is something that I've been seeing more and more. A lot of the fundamental aspects of Muslim culture, or stereotypical Muslim culture, perhaps, or that which is taken to be quintessential Muslim culture, such as what the general mosque idea of what a mosque looks like, or there's the 5 prayers, the purity rituals. A lot of them seem to derive, in fact, from Persia and Persian practice and Persian customs.
That's completely correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So it totally. This maybe serves as a segue because I've done a little bit of research into both ancient Arabic sources, such as the Muqaddimah of Ibn Khaldun, which I have here, also the Muruj al-Dhahab of al-Mas'udi, which is pretty interesting book, and I've encountered in these texts some interesting stuff about Sassanid or Persian influences in later Muslim or Islamic culture. But before I get into that, another really interesting thing I found was in this book, Social Justice in the Ancient World. It has a chapter on social justice in ancient Iran, and it talks about, for example, how religious minorities were treated, and it's quite interesting. In general, there seems to have been like and this goes all the way back to the Achaemenids, but there was a Persian tradition of, you might say, liberalism, of tolerance towards ethno-religious minorities, and this even appears in the Bible, where Cyrus is called the Messiah at one point.
Because he liberates the Jews and allows them to return to Israel from Babylonian captivity. Yeah. Cyrus the Great gets a reputation as like the first main human rights guy. I think.
Yeah. I'm sure it's a little
overhyped, but.
Yeah.
But the idea of the religious minorities in late antiquity, it's pretty fascinating. Zoroastrianism was the state religion in Sasanian Iran, but we have variations, and one of the main contention points between the Parthians and the Persians, the Parthian noble houses, that is, and the Sasanians, was actually a religious factor. We have two different main sects in Iran. One followed in the north by the Parthians, and one followed in the south by the Persians. And again, we have this religious aspect of the rivalry.
That rivalry.
Again, mirrored by the Shia Buyids and the Sunni Samanids. Very much similar to that. Zoroastrianism in Central Asia is a completely different thing. It's very Hinduized, it's very Buddhicized, and you have artwork from Sogdiana showing Hindu deities alongside Zoroastrian deities, like alongside Buddhas, and it makes really cool artwork. Yeah.
Interesting.
Religious minorities.
Sorry, continue.
Okay, so religious minorities in late antique Iran, the most important ones are, say, the Jews and the Christians. Both of these had some interaction with the state. The Sasanian Shahanshah would appoint sort of leaders of the religious communities. We have decreasing amounts of integration in the 7th centuries, where the Jews and the Christians kind of formed their own little villages, and the Zoroastrians, obviously, that they're state endorsed. But it's very different to the earlier Hellenistic period, where you could be in the same village and you have, different religions just mix and mangle in with each other and kind of all influencing each other. You know how it is with the old polytheistic Roman and Greek religions, is they just borrow gods from the Egyptians, from the Persians, from the Celts and everything.
Yes.
That isn't as much a feature anymore. Yeah, and when the Arabs first invade, what happens is they don't really interact with these minorities as much. You have the patriarchs of the Nestorian community going to the Caliph saying, "Hey, give us a leader," and the Arabs are like, "Nah, you can do your own thing. We're not interested." The Zoroastrians don't get on too well with the Arabs. Well, the Zoroastrian clergy don't get on too well with the Arabs because the Arabs all of a sudden stop funding them, because why would they? And so a lot of the fire temples are kind of abandoned and laid to waste and things. It's not out of, it's purely a financial thing. The Muslim Umayyads weren't funding the Zoroastrian clergy, especially one that was so heavily entwined with the Sasanian state as such.
Yeah.
The Zoroastrian clergy were one main source of rebellion. The rebellions in Central Asia and in Armenia against the Umayyad rule all had a highly religious practice. And there's a very interesting text from the sort of mid-late 7th century. It's a Zoroastrian poem called "The Coming of Bahram the Victorious," and it's got it says some of the nastiest things about Arabs I've ever read, and about how they destroy fire temples and eat children and all sorts of crazy things. And then you have this heroic Sasanian king called Bahram the Victorious, who may or may not have been a historical figure, who leads an army from China with 1,000 elephants and kind of defeats the Arabs and reinstigates the Sasanian dynasty, which didn't really happen. Yeah.
Should I open up for people to join? Are you ready to answer questions if they come up?
Sure.
Yeah, well, me too.
We can continue chatting. Well, and then if people want to join, they can join and ask questions. So I'm reading here, for example, this is quoted in this article on the social justice in ancient Iran. Quote goes, "The adherents of foreign religions were able to live in peace. Their organization and their religious laws were respected, so long as they did not set themselves against the authority of the state or conspire with its enemies. It was political reasons more than religious intolerance that brought about the first great persecution of Christians under Shabur II."
Yeah, that is by and large true. The religious persecution of Christians in the Sasanian period was more to do with the Romans suddenly becoming a Christian state, and all of a sudden we have the Christians in Sasanian Empire kind of being religiously allied to the Roman state rather than to the Sasanian state, which is why that persecution happens. It's different to the persecution of, say, Nestorians under the Romans, which was for an ideological purpose, and we have Nestorians fleeing east into the Sasanians, and then again further east into Central Asia.
Yeah. And so then I guess, is that how the Mongols acquired Syriac as their language or script?
No.
Although
Well,
the Uyghurs, or the what do you call the Uyghurs or the Uyghurs or the Turks in modern day China, for a while they were Nestorian Christians, right?
yeah, that's right. There was a big mix, and you have all the minorities kind of appearing there. You have Nestorians, and then you have Manichaeans, and both of which weren't they had their origins in sort of the Near East, but they weren't very popular in the Near East at all. They became really popular on the Silk Road. Yeah, and I think some of the Uyghurs were Nestorian, some of them were Manichaean. The alphabet itself, actually, it's derived from so you have the Aramaic alphabet, which gives off the Parthian and Middle Persian alphabets, and also the Sogdian alphabet, which sometime around the 8th or 9th century rotates 90 degrees and becomes a vertical script, which then goes further east and becomes the Mongol, the Uyghur, the Manichaean script, and all those derivatives.
Yeah, interesting. Something else here that I found really interesting. I only just read this today. There was some. It seems like there was some degree of. And the thing I find so interesting about this is that I'm seeing I'm finding a lot of parallels between, say, what I don't know, some Muslim apologists claim about Islam or Islamic history, and what I'm finding is actually the case with Iran, ancient Iran, and the Persians. So, for example, this is a hymn attributed to Zarathustra. The Gathas or something? I'm not familiar with the Zoroastrian scripture, so I don't know what to say and if I'm saying it correctly, but I think it's Agatha or something. Okay, whatever that is, it's a hymn, it's a saying attributed to Zarathustra, who's the prophet of the Zoroastrian religion, which worships Ahura Mazda, the light, or the good god, and then there's Ahriman, or Angramenu, I think, I don't know how to pronounce it, the evil god, and this was the religion of the Sassanids and of ancient Persia. This is the fire temple religion. Okay, is that right?
That's a very, very, very simplified way of putting it.
Yeah. Super simplified.
I suppose that's more accurate of the Achaemenids. By the time of the Sasanians, actually we have a lot of Hellenistic influence and Hindu influence, and it's actually kind of polytheistic. You have Ahura Mazda, who's the god, and then you have Bahram, who's the god of war, and Anahit,
you have sub-gods.
or Apamnapat, who's kind of the god of water, and then they're the two main minor deities, but I'm sure there are others.
Yeah. And then you have sort of races of angels and demons or something, so the Devas or Divas or something. And,
It's
okay. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated exactly which characters are doing what, but yeah, it is essentially a dualistic philosophy, and you have the gods on one side and the demons on the other, and in this eternal cosmic struggle for humankind, I suppose.
Yeah. So, and in this hymn attributed to Zarathustra, he allegedly said, "O Mazda," which is the supreme god, "from the beginning you created soul and body, you granted man the mental power and knowledge. You placed life in the physical body and gave mankind the power to act, speak, and guide. You wished that everyone should choose his or her own faith and path freely." So it's quite interesting, this sort of how this was sort of impacted or utilized. So, for example, in the article I mentioned, which is the Social Justice in Ancient Iran, which is by Farhang Meher, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He says, freedom of man and freedom of choice lie at the foundation of the Zarathustrian tradition, a freedom which should be exercised through wisdom and rationality and in accordance with the truth, the law of Asha. In the Gathic tradition, every individual using his faculties of holy wisdom and truth is entitled to question the legitimacy of law, even God's law, until one is satisfied with its legitimacy. Rationality negates dogma. Legitimacy of dogmas may be challenged, as can the legitimacy of any edict issued by the civil authorities. So I don't know if that's 100% accurate or whatever, or if there's some, but does that seem accurate, or from your research, or how representative is that?
Yeah, it's pretty representative, actually. In the Sasanian period,
Amazing.
we have a brief century or so interlude under one of the main Zoroastrian priests who rose to prominence in the 3rd century called Kerdir or Kardir or however you want to spell it. And he was kind of a bit of a jackass. He was big on the persecution of Manichaeans and Christians and everything. Yeah. But his influence died off in the mid 5th century. And from then on, we have more religious tolerance. What I found really fascinating is I recently uncovered a piece of stucco from Ctesiphon showing an image of Shiva, the Hindu god, as far west as Ctesiphon, which I thought was pretty cool.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and the guy is dressed.
It's like Buddhas in Viking.
Yes, I know, right? It's so cool. Yeah, the guy is dressed exactly as you would expect any Gupta dynasty Indian deity to be dressed. He has a dhoti and wearing an ample amount of jewelry and everything. Unfortunately, you can't quite see his head, and he's normally shown with a trident in Sogdian art and Hindu art. But again, you don't really see that because the head's kind of been vanished. We have very large Indian minorities in Sasanian Iran. They sort of migrated. Well, two groups migrated westwards, just following the water buffalo herds along the coast, and then another group was kind of transported when Bahram Gur he went to India for a bunch of diplomatic relations and stuff, and was pretty impressed with their music. So he brought.
Is this the one where he brings them back and spreads them out through southern Iran, and Iran is now full of all these musicians and I read about that today. Really interesting.
It is, and in Middle Persian, there's a big list of musical instruments, not all of which have been translated, but we have one instrument called the veen, which, I mean, to my eyes, it looks exactly like the ancient Sanskrit veena, which is the sort of arched harp. Popular in India, less popular in Iran, but immensely popular among the Silk Road. For some reason, a lot of the Indian art styles, a lot of their musical and dress and everything influences were really popular on the Silk Road, but less so in Iran. I suppose it's due to the fact that most invasions of India have been from Central Asia rather than Iran itself, and things spread that way. You had the Kushans and the Hephthalites and the Kitharites and all those guys.
Yeah. So another interesting thing I read in here to do with, say, and this one seems to be a Persian influence on perhaps Islamic law or custom. I don't know how familiar you are with Muslim slavery apologetics, but it's the arguments are pretty interesting, and they're usually like, look, the Quran says, pat your slave on the head and tell him he's a good bloke every now and again. It's like, treat your slaves with a certain minimum level of decency. So slavery, basically, Muhammad was saying, free all the slaves, essentially. It's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm thinking of it.
Yeah, I've heard that stuff.
And there's like lots of hadith which say, if you sin this way, free a slave. If you do this, free a slave, there's this punishment, or it's a blessing if you free this kind of slave, or blah blah. There's a lot of like rulings on this kind of thing, and there's lots of things saying you should treat your slaves with some level of decency or fairness. That's great. But what's quite interesting is when I read this article or chapter rather on, say, Persian slavery institutions or customs, I was quite startled because it's very similar, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
It's almost exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Yeah.
So for example, it talks about how first of all it says there's no word for slavery in Zoroastrian Holy Scripture. There doesn't really seem to be much slavery or any slavery in Iranian mythology and tradition. There is so Greek sources indicate that there were slaves.
There were slaves. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is errors in translation because we have four I guess tiers of slaves and servants and whatever other word you can apply to this sort of relationship of master and servant, and the top tier is a guy called the Banda or Bandagon plural, who's kind of a paid servant, kind of retainer. He's doing pretty well for himself. And then you have decreasing levels of status. The next is a Zoroastrian slave who's been bought, then a non-Zoroastrian slave, and then you have just kind of random prisoners and garbage and stuff. But no, I mean, again, we have rules on how they can be freed. So any non-Zoroastrian slaves who convert to Zoroastrianism can appeal to the church. Is that the right word? Can appeal to the religious body,
religious institution. Yeah.
That's right, and they can free him. For example, slaves can be freed after doing a certain amount of good works and everything. Essentially, the Bandagon weren't transferable with the land, so that so you had some were sort of personal retainers, some were tied to the land. They were tied to the land, but they weren't owned by the guy who owned the land, if that makes any sense. So if the guy who owned the land moved, they could move with him. They didn't have to, but they weren't suddenly the property of the next guy who moved in, if that makes sense. So it's a little different to, say, Russian serfdom feudalism or medieval European feudalism in terms of how people have their relationships. But it is sort of kind of a feudal sort of thing. Yeah.
Some of this. So I'll just quickly read some of this because there's a lot of parity here with what you're saying. In several places in the collection of the laws of the Sasanian period, in brackets, Martikan i Hazar Datistan. I don't know if that.
Yes, the Book of 1,000 Judgments. It's the main book of law during the Sasanian period.
Oh, brilliant! Okay, and it says allusions have been made to the law governing the ownership and treatment of slaves. Certain principles may be formulated from such laws relating to specific cases. The slaves were captured foreigners who were non-Zoroastrians. The ownership of the slave belonged to the man. The owner had to treat the slave humanely. Mm-hmm. Violence and tyranny towards the slave was forbidden. In particular, the beating of a slave woman would be considered a crime. When a non-Zoroastrian slave, such as a Christian slave, embraced Zoroastrianism, he or she could pay his or her slave price and become free. Mm-hmm. When a Christian non-Zoroastrian slave converted to Zoroastrianism by marrying a Zoroastrian, the matrimonial partner could pay the price of the slave to the owner and free the slave. Whoever sold a slave to a non-Zoroastrian committed a crime. Both the vendor and the purchaser were subject to punishment. If the slave, together with his or her foreign master, embraced Zoroastrianism, he or she remained enslaved when the master pledged the services of the slave to a third party. The master was entitled to receive the wage or reward that accrued to the slave. If, however, the third party, in addition to the wage, paid some money as a gift to the slave, the latter was entitled to keep it and use it, and in a later stage to purchase his or her freedom from the master. And then this is quite interesting here in particular because this is just what I was talking about before from the Hadith. To free a slave, irrespective of his or her faith, was a good deed.
Absolutely.
Besides, so that, I mean, it's, and more than that, besides the right to keep gifts given to them, the slaves were entitled to at least 3 days of rest in a month. It goes on. The law protected the slave. Nobody may inflict upon his slaves a fatal punishment for a single crime. Not even the king himself may slay anyone on account of one crime.
Well, he did. But,
this is just according to this source, I guess. There's ideals and reality. But it's quite interesting. So these kinds of laws have extreme parity. And I'm going to say that it seems to me incredibly likely, certainly entirely possible, that these laws are the origins for the later Islamic laws on slavery.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that.
Together with the ritual laws because it's already pretty established that the Islamic 5 prayers seems to be Zoroastrian or to be profoundly influenced by Zoroastrianism. Because remember, the Quran doesn't say 5 prayers; it only lists 3 prayers. Only 3 prayers are named. There is no 5 prayers mentioned there. And the Hadith, of course, are from much later. And then the ritual purity and obsession with cleanliness also seems to have been impacted by Zoroastrianism, for example. Now you may ask, how? How could this happen? How could it be possible that Persian culture could influence Islam? And so this is going to use this as a very slick segue into some interesting information I find in these sources, these medieval Arabic texts. Something interesting first, though, before I get into sort of Persian impacts on Islam, is Ibn Khaldun at one point talks about pre-Islamic Persian science in the third volume here. And he talks about how among the Persians, the intellectual sciences played a large and important role, since the Persian dynasties were large and were powerful and ruled without interruption. And this is something quite interesting, and you're probably familiar with this legend. It repeats the legend of how the Persians believed that the Greeks had got their science from the Persians, and so that it was okay for the Persians to then learn science off the Greeks, because the Greeks had got it from us anyway in the past. So
yeah, it's pretty interesting, actually. I mean, the history of science in this period, there is actually very little that has survived from the Sasanian period, so it's hard to comment on Sasanian science in and of itself. We have a lot coming from the early Islamic period, but what it seems to show is a predominantly Greek influence. We do know that during the reign of Khosrow I in the mid-6th century, he sent one of his advisors to India to learn Indian science. The result of which was, I suppose it kind of spread into Iran, but never really gained that much popularity. Indian mathematics becomes popular, after the Arabs conquer everything and spread the numerals and stuff. But yeah, we have no real evidence of Indian scientific works specific works in Iran in the Sasanian period. Only that they were kind of used maybe based on this here story.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, though, because I'm seeing a lot of in some of the research I've done, it seems that there was so everyone I'm sure is by now familiar with the Abbasid caliphs and how they had these translation bureaus and they took the science from other countries and translated it. That there seems to be some precursors to this with the Sassanids.
Yes, the story of Khosrow I and his vizier going to India looking for the secret of eternal life or something, and coming back with the Panchatantra, or Kalila Vademna as it's more commonly known, a series of fables. He also brought back chess and backgammon, possibly, or their ancestors thereof. So
yeah. So there's a really So in the first place, it seems that the Sassanids kind of often seem to have functioned as like a refuge for the Nestorian Christians who were fleeing from Roman persecution, and they brought with them Hellenistic medicine, medical tradition, philosophy and logic, and Aristotelian and Platonic works and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the great academy.
Which were translated.
Yeah, the great.
Yeah, Judeshapur. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was primarily settled by Nestorians fleeing eastwards from Roman persecution. Yeah, you had big libraries.
Nasibin.
Nasibin.
Who apparently was during the late 5th century. Many Nestorian Syrian refugees settled there, and it became, quote, an outlying center of Greek learning and Syriac.
Yeah, that's right. See, Nasibin is also the name of Nisibis, the city, which, one of those border flip-flop cities that was used 100 times per month, and all that kind of things. But so Judeshapur becomes a thriving center of Hellenistic medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and then I think. Now I'm really bad with the names, and of course I usually use the Arabic version of the names, so forgive me. But Ardashir the First, who reigned from 226 to 241, and his son Sabur the First, who reigned from 241 to 272, apparently initiated sort of state-sponsored
science research and intellectual activity in Jundishapur.
Gondishapur existed this early, but it really became very prominent in the 5th century onwards. That's right.
Yeah. Who's Kisra?
Kisra is the Arab-sized Khosrow, and there are two Khosrows. There's Khosrow Anushirvan, or Khosrow the First, in the 6th century, and then there's Khosrow the Second, or Khosrow Parviz, in the 7th century.
Yeah. So Khosrow the First, he was the one who elevated Jundishapur, quote, into a full-scale center of translation, study, and teaching. And there's a really interesting quote attributed to him. It goes like this. I'm citing this from, I think, the Encyclopedia Iranica. And he allegedly said, "We examined the customs of our forebears, but concerned with the discovery of truth, we also studied the customs and conducts of the Romans and Indians, and accepted those among them which seemed reasonable and praiseworthy, not merely likable. We have not rejected anyone because they belong to a different religion or people, and having examined the good customs and laws our ancestors as well as those of the foreigners, we have not declined to adopt anything which was good, nor avoid anything which was bad. Affection for our forebears did not lead us to accept customs which were not good." So, this is probably anachronistic, but perhaps it demonstrates some degree of the sort of intellectual atmosphere or attitude in Sassanid Persia at the time, where you had this sort of influx of Hellenistic knowledge and being sponsored and promoted by the state.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It was a fairly open...
I have a question. Are you familiar with the Book of the Righteous Arnavirav?
I know of it. I haven't actually read it as such.
Okay, because there was a question if you can elaborate a bit.
Okay. Oh, right. So like I said, I know of it. I haven't actually read it as such. My knowledge of it is I think it is a Zoroastrian and kind of dream journal of this guy who sort of goes to heaven and sees a bunch of truths and then comes back. I really haven't actually read the entire thing.
Oh, I think this is
not a test. It's a question if you know about it, and if you do, that's it.
Okay.
I think that story is cited as some as the inspiration for the night journey of Muhammad.
Yeah.
In the Hadith, where he goes up to heaven through the layers of heaven and meets all these people and comes back with this religious knowledge.
Yeah, so it is the same. Going on very fragmentary knowledge. Like I said, I'm primarily an art historian and military historian. And, the religious stuff is kind of second place.
Yeah. So what I was saying before with Ibn Khaldun, something interesting he notes, though, is that when the Muslims conquered Persia and came upon an indescribably large number of books and scientific papers, Sa'ad bin Abu Waqqas wrote to Umar bin al-Khattab, asking him for permission to take them and distribute them as booty among the Muslims. On that occasion, Umar wrote to him, "Throw them into the water. If what they contain is right guidance, God has given us better guidance. If it is error, God has protected us from it." Thus, the Muslims threw them into the water or into the fire, and the sciences of the Persians were lost and did not reach us. Now, that story is probably legendary.
Yeah,
it's similar to the similar trope. There's a similar trope here with what happened in Alexandria, supposedly. Basically the exact same narrative. So this is probably legendary, but it is interesting that Persian science was seemingly destroyed because we don't really have it anymore. And it didn't really seem to resurface that dramatically under the Arabs. As you were saying, it was mostly the Greek science that got a resurgence under the Abbasids. And one thing that really struck me, I've combined two different metaphors, sorry guys, was the so-called Baghdad batteries, which were these alleged early primitive batteries. Are actually, not calling them Baghdad seems a bit anachronistic, because from what I saw, they're actually Sasanian.
They're Arsacid, so they're a little bit before the Sasanian dynasty.
Oh, yeah, Parthian. Okay,
yeah,
Parthian.
that's right.
These were never referenced, as far as I'm aware, in the knowledge of this technology or these what was it used for? Electroplating or something? Apparently,
It was most probably used for electroplating or for various sort of magical party tricks.
Yeah.
Certainly not much more than that.
Yeah, well, this information seems this sort of, what would you say, call it proto-electricity technology or something?
Yeah.
I don't know what you'd call it, but that knowledge seems to have vanished after the Arab invasions, and maybe even before, I don't know.
Yeah, that's
although
right,
I did read somewhere that Biruni, apparently, I don't know if it's fiction or if this is true, and I haven't been able to run up on this yet to verify this, but I read somewhere that Biruni talked about the domesticated lightning of the Persians, which was lost. But I don't know how true that is, so I'd have to look into that. But yeah, so it's interesting. However, but despite the conquests, a lot of influences did remain. So Dimitri Gutas, in his book on Greek thought, which is really good, highly recommend it. He says the Sasanian culture carried by these elite, the Persian elite, I guess, had two components that important background. So the Umayyads were the first great dynasty who ruled the Paleo-Muslim Empire. The Umayyads, and they were sort of Arab supremacists, and when they were overthrown, there was a series of massive rebellions against them in the early 700s from the Berbers, for example, though that one I think was unsuccessful. But there was one massive, and there was a Shiite rebellion, and there was a Kharijite rebellion. But then one rebellion was successful, and that was the one coming out of Khorasan, led by Abu Muslim.
Yeah, the Abbasids. That's right.
Yeah, the Abbasids. The Hash at the time it was the United Hashemite Front, I guess. But then the Abbasid section of the Hashemites took over and fucked over the Shia, what would later become the Shiites. Actually, this is talked about in this by Masoudi, which is really interesting. Because one thing that's quite interesting in Islamic history is that Sunni and Shia are kind of anachronistic. Both of them like to pretend that they are the true original Islam, but when you went earlier, they're both kind of later articulations or crystallizations, and are not actually really that representative of early Islam. An example of that with Shiites is mentioned here by Masoudi when he talks about how, I think it was Mansur was let me just find this, but I think he says Mansur was the first to actually cause a division within the Hashemites. So prior to that, basically, and this is also Patricia Cronin talks about this in her book on I think it's called God's Rule, the book on early Islamic government models and models of rulership. How the early Shia thought was actually more nebulous. It wasn't necessarily concentrated on the lineage of Ali. It was actually broader and was just pro-Hashemite. So anyone from the Hashemi clan would suffice as the true legitimate ruler, and it only really narrowed down to Ali's descendants later on. And you see this with the rebellion of al-Mukhtar, I think he's called.
Have you seen that TV show? There's this Iranian serial TV show called the Mukhtar Name, and I haven't. It's garbage. Actually, I don't know if it's any good. When you study archaeology, you can't really enjoy historical TV shows because you're like, that tunic's like 3 decades too old, and that helmet never existed, and that beard is too.
Yeah, I saw the thing you posted about. Was it Total War or something?
Oh yeah,
the assassinate soldiers, and you just have all these critical annotations. What is this? This is Viking. Like what?
Like, I'm not even going to comment on this helmet. 0 out of 10 would not bang. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. So it's interesting. So it's interesting. This historical anachronisms are quite irritating, I have to say. Especially when people use it ideologically. So like ethnic nationalists are the fucking worst with this. Like you see all these crappy, amateur videos. Yeah, the greater Armenian nation, and they have like these maximized maps of the greater Armenia. This is what we should have, or greater Iran, and it's like, all the way to like Kazakhstan or something.
Because they're like, the Sasanians were this glorious kingdom where everybody was like a king, and then the Arabs came and destroyed. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like,
Pan-Turkish Empire. It's like, the Turkish Islamic Union. It's like all Muslim countries plus all Turkish nations. It's anyway. So people
the Turkish ones are pretty hilarious. Like, oh yeah, guys. The Parthians were Turks. Oh, and the Turks discovered America. You heard that one, right?
Yeah. That one. Oh my god, that one is total crap. What is it? Oh god. We talked about it last show. I won't go on about it now. But yeah, so it's have the same thing with these religious sects. So Sunnis like to pretend that Sunni Islam is what Muhammad was doing. It's total crap. Same with Shias. The Shias, I do think that some aspects of Shia religion more older than Sunni conception. So I think the Shiite conception of the Caliph is older than the Sunni idea of the Caliph, for example. But the Shiites are just as anachronistic. So if I can find this, it's on page 386. Let's see, 386. He talks about yes. So Mansur, he says, so the Caliph al-Qahir allegedly demanded the traditionist or historian Muhammad bin Ali al-Misri to tell him a true history of the caliphate and to not lie to him because he's a caliph and to not give him flattery and to actually be totally clear and lucid with him. Just tell him, give me a true history, give me what's and all. And so he says of Mansur, he was the first to sow discord between the children of Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib and the family of Abu Talib, who until then had made common cause. So this is really interesting. What this indicates, and what this is a glimpse at, is what I was saying before, how Shiites were more nebulous. And you could, and the Abbasids and the Alids were the same. They were part of the same. And so with the Abbasid revolution from, I think, was it 747 to 750 or something along those lines, it was actually, the rebellion was a Shiite and Abbasid rebellion. It was a Hashemite rebellion. It was the clan Hashim, including the descendants of Ali and the descendants of Ibn al-Abbas. Although in the end it was the descendants of Ibn al-Abbas who were successful, and they fucked over the Alawites, who become Shiites as we know them today. And so Gutas notes that he notes that the Sasanian culture. Oh, so the Abbasids came to power with the help of Persian aristocracy and Persian troops, and I think like Arabicized Persians and Persianized Arabs. It's not exactly clear, so there's some debate about who exactly was doing what. But yeah, this is massive Persian influence, and there's a lot of Persians involved apparently. And so the Sasanian culture, and so Gutas says, and I quote, the Sasanian culture carried by these Persian elites, had two components that proved of immense significance to al-Mansur, who's the practical founder of the Abbasid dynasty. His brother Safa was the founder, but Mansur is the one who actually was the real builder of the dynasty and the administration. Significance to al-Mansur in helping him to consolidate the Abbasid cause, Zoroastrian imperial ideology, and political astrology. Fused together, they formed the cornerstone of al-Mansur's Abbasid dynastic ideology. So there was a real ideological and religious sort of influence there in the Abbasids. Mas'udi notes on page 391, he says that Ma'mun, another great Abbasid caliph who ruled from the 810s, who rose from the civil war, so I don't know exactly the date, his beginning of his rule, ruled until 833, and he, quote, devoted himself to the study of astrology and its rulings. He modeled his conduct on the Sassanid kings, such as Ardashir bin Babak and others. He had a passion for reading old books and studied them constantly, persevering in his researches until he succeeded in understanding them and getting at their very heart. So here we have a science and cultural sort of impact of the Sassanids in Abbasid culture. And then Mas'udi also notes that Mu'tasim, I don't know if I can pronounce that name correctly, sorry about it, another Abbasid caliph who was the successor to Ma'mun. He reigned from 833 to 841, and he was, quote, and this is from Mas'udi again, He was distinguished by his wish to imitate Persian kings in his table services and in the fashion for wearing a turban over a soft cap. The people adopted this headgear.
Not something the Sasanians did.
Hey?
Ironically, the turban over a soft cap was not something the Sasanians did.
I think what he means is that rather than wearing the cap, he instead wore a turban.
Yeah, that's not something that happened during the Sasanians.
Oh, so the Sasanians did not wear turbans?
Nope. No.
I think it's either maybe it was more ancient kings, or it was the stereotype of what the Persians wore and not what they actually wore.
It was
so
probably. So this is a bit of a contention, because various different peoples claim the turban as their own, but
yeah.
Turbans were very, very common in Mauryan dynasty India, and they were they weren't common in Gupta dynasty, oddly enough, but they were kind of sort of common along the Silk Road as well. Yeah. And we have depictions of quote unquote Persians from, say, Dunhuang and Khotan and everything, and they're wearing turbans, and they're wearing Central Asian tunics and sort of Turkish boots. So I don't know why they're claimed as Persians, but they're wearing like a...
Maybe what is meant is Khurasanis or Sogdians or something.
Yeah.
And so it's Persia in a greater sense.
Again, Sogdians and turbans... So some turbans are occasionally seen on some Sogdian goddesses. But again...
I don't know what...
For those who don't know the names, who don't know the era, can you just put a time to this and a location for those who don't know?
Sure. So Sogdiana is kind of modern-day Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and the time period... And Dunhuang is in western China. It's in the Taklamakan Desert. So this is the Silk Road we're talking about now. And the dates of these paintings and all these things, these are primarily 7th through to the 9th centuries AD. So the Arabs already done their business in Iran. They're starting to do their business in Central Asia and Afghanistan. And in China, we've got the Tang dynasty and the Tibetan empires kind of hashing it out there.
Yeah. I guess, Mas'udi... I think it's a little bit ambiguous exactly when he died, but according to the introduction to this translation of his work, he died around the year 956, so 10th century. It's one of our earliest. This is one of our earliest Arabic chronicles, so it's a pretty useful source. And I guess the key point here was Mas'udi's probably wrong then. Obviously, what you're saying is correct. They didn't wear turbans. But the key point is that the Caliph was consciously attempting to imitate Persians.
Yeah.
So it demonstrates that there was this obsession with Persian culture, and that there was this interest to try and emulate them. We've already gone over this. We've already gone over the dhimmi laws, or the treatment of So the religious minorities in Iran was of tolerance, and so there seems to be parity there with early Arab Muslim law and jurisprudence that subsequently developed, which also seems to adopt similar principles. So there's probably an influence there. Some academics have suggested that. But something I find even more interesting is to do with the religious scholarship in general. Ibn Khaldun talks about this. Now, this is going back to how did all these influences, how did the prayer influences and the purity influences, enter into Hadith, for example? How could all the slavery laws, which are just magically so similar to the Persian ones? Wow, what a coincidence! Obviously I think there's a connection there. It seems to be quite extremely probable. But how would that have got there? How would have Persian culture and laws and traditions have gained entrance into Hadith and into Muslim tradition? Well, I think the answer lies with the identity of most of the, a lot of the seminal early scholars.
Yeah, that's right.
So I mentioned before. I mean, the whole is actually really funny. I don't know why, but it's kind of like the revenge of the conquered. Because the Arabs conquered Islam, and then the Persians basically... Sorry, the Arabs conquered the Persians, and then the Persians sort of conquered Islam, I guess. Or I don't know, or ended up taking over.
Yeah, it's one of the recurring themes in Iranian history where an invader comes and then becomes so thoroughly Iranianized that he can't really tell him apart from the natives. You can't really identify him as the... I mean, the same thing happened with the Seljuks and with the Mongols, and to an extent with Alexander Seleucids as well.
Yeah. So Ibn Khaldun says, most of the scholars in Islam have been non-Arabs and Persians, essentially. It is a remarkable fact that, with few exceptions, most Muslim scholars, both in the religious and in the intellectual sciences, have been non-Arabs. When a scholar is of Arab origin, he is a non-Arab in language and upbringing and has non-Arab teachers. This is so in spite of the fact that Islam is an Arabic religion and its founder was an Arab. And he goes through and he gives, talks about how this came to be, and he cites, for example, the founders of grammar was Sibawayh, and after him, Al-Farisi and Az-Zajjaj. All of them were non-Arab Persian descent. Most of the Hadith scholars who preserve traditions for the Muslims were also non-Arabs, Persians, or Persian in language and upbringing, because of the discipline was widely cultivated in the Iraq and the regions beyond. Furthermore, all the scholars who worked in the sciences of the principles of jurisprudence, I guess that would be Usul al-Fiqh, so formulating Islamic law, essentially, were non-Arabs, Persians, as is well known. The same applies to speculative theologians and to most Quran commentators. Only the non-Arabs, bracket Persians, engaged in the task of preserving knowledge and writing systematic scholarly. Only the non-Arabs engaged in the task of preserving knowledge and writing systematic scholarly works. So it's quite interesting. And so examples of that would be all the famous muhaddithun. So Bukhari was Iranian. Bukhara. Muslim bin al-Hajjaj and Naysaburi was from Nishapur. Iranian. Abu Dawud, Sulaiman bin Ashhath, I can't remember his second name. As-Sijistani, right, from Sistan or Sijistan, Iranian. What's Tirmidhi's for? I don't remember Tirmidhi's.
Wait, is that the important guy you were referring to earlier? Because I thought you meant somebody completely different.
Sistan, yeah, Sistan. I mean Abu Dawud.
I thought you were talking about Yaqub ibn Layth in Safar, or however, whatever his name is.
No. I mean
who's like 9,000% badass, but.
No. I mean Abu Dawud, the muhaddith, the seminal hadith scholar. Tirmidhi. The fourth most authoritative, well, I don't know if it's actually number 4. After Muslim, Bukhari and Muslim, I guess the others are just all on the same tier, apart from Ibn Majah. But Tirmidhi, another canonical, Sunni hadith collector whose collection, Jamia Tirmidhi, is part of the hadith canon. He's from Tirmidh, which is Iran. He's Iranian. Who else? Nasai is I can't remember exactly where he's from, but he was also Persian. Actually, you know what? I have a list of all this.
I think most Tirmizi would probably take a little umbrage at being called Persian. Tirmiz was the. I think most guys from Tirmiz, well, medieval Tirmiz, would probably take a little offense at being called Persian. Tirmiz was the capital of the old Chaghanian state. It was one of these Hephthalite successors that kind of stuck around a couple of centuries after the Sasanians did. I think Tirmiz was one of the.
Or perhaps would I call it like Persianate, as opposed to.
Yeah, I think Tirmiz and Chaghanian were probably. I think they were the first ones that just voluntarily decided to accept Umayyads superiority, really. A lot of the other Sogdian states were like, no, I'm independent, and they got conquered. But,
yeah. Nasai was from Khorasan. There we go. Ibn Majah was from Media, or Jabal. Well, I guess not Media, but he's from Jabal. Ibn Ishaq, who wrote the first extant, or partially modified extant, biography of Muhammad under the Abbasids, was Mesopotamia. He was from Mesopotamia. He was of Persian heritage. Tabari was from Tabaristan. You know, so there's Iranian heritage or Iranian ethnicity, let's say. So there's this. I mean, it seems pretty clear. Ghazali, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Muslim theologian and thinker, was Persian or Iranian. So I mean, it seems pretty clear over and over and over again. There's a pattern emerges. The religion of Islam, the law, the jurisprudence, the traditions, the theology, was in a very big way articulated by Iranians or Persians or Persianized people. So it's no wonder then, I think, that there's so many seeming Persian influences in Islam, because Persians are the ones who defined it. What are your thoughts?
Completely correct, yeah. I mean, the bulk of the bureaucracy under the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasties were also, native Iranians, not Arabs or
Iranians.
Yeah.
The Arabs left a lot of the administrative and bureaucratic apparatus in place when they invaded.
That's right.
In fact, in Eastern Iran, I think I already said this actually, but they ruled via the proxy of Persian aristocracy in a lot of instances.
Mm-hmm.
So it's little wonder that Persians and Sassanid Persia and Persians and Persian culture in general had such a big impact upon the caliphate and Islamic institutions and law and tradition.
Mm-hmm.
We have 4 minutes. Can you summarize a little bit? Because this was fascinating, I'm sure, just to give people a perspective who were not here in the beginning, just to sort of put this all in perspective where it belongs in history and how it relates to Islam.
Sure. So just to summarize, we have the Sasanians who ruled in Iran between the 3rd and the 7th centuries. They built sort of a bureaucratic, intellectual, artistic heritage, which was basically completely imitated and influenced the later Islamic dynasties, like the Umayyads and the Abbasids. They built an idea of Iranian identity, tied in to an extent with religion and tied in to an extent with descent from Parthian and Persian noble houses, which helped spur on the Iranian revival in the 10th century and gave identity to many of the post-Islamic Iranian dynasties in the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries and onwards.
If you say religion, which religion is that?
So originally it was Zoroastrianism, and you had the two branches of Zoroastrianism, followed by the Persian and the Parthian clans. And then later on, it became Islam, and the Persian influence on Islam, as we already discussed. The influence on law and various moral codes and dress and architecture.
Definitely monotheistic. This is the important part.
Yes, Islam is monotheistic, Zoroastrianism is dualistic, and late Sasanian Zoroastrianism is complicated, for want of a better word. It's not quite dualistic, it's not quite polytheistic. That's one of the things that kind of doesn't really appear later on, is you don't really have the emergence of minor deities in Islam like we do in Zoroastrianism. I suppose that's one of the few things that isn't imitated.
Okay, and then what happens after that?
Well, after that, after the conquest, you mean?
Yeah, because
to summarize, you mean? Well,
yes.
basically the Persians were fighting the Romans for a very long time, and through that, and there was a lot of dynastic and aristocratic tension within Iran, and
until they were rudely interrupted.
Hey? Yeah. Well, the state collapsed, and there was a lot of anarchy, and different houses were vying for power. Hashtag Game of Thrones. And yeah, so then the Arabs invaded at this point, and were able to conquer Iran or parts of Iran, a lot of the time with Persian help, using Persian troops. The Persians played each other off each other. There was a lot of massive rebellions, which we didn't actually touch upon, but in the end, the Arabs mainly settled in the west, and in the east it was through proxy and through the local Iranian rulers. And then out of the colonies that developed in the east, the Abbasids arose and took over the whole caliphate by around like 750, and then you saw sort of a renaissance of Persian culture and art and customs, or maybe pseudo-Persian in the case of those goddamn turbans. And so yeah, we ended up having a massive Persian influence on subsequent so-called Arab culture, and sort of Muslim religion and religious practices and customs, and Persians ended up being the main ones articulating, Islamic law, Islamic theology, Islamic traditions, commentaries. Even the Arabic language was actually articulated by Persians.
I think the main grammarians were Persian.
And philologists and everything were all Persians. So that's one of history's little ironies. So Islam is kind of the Persian revenge against the Arabs.
Nadeem, would you say that if you look at Iranians, would you say that they are like an ethnic group upon themselves?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
If you go back
and
look at the influences that they had from different genes, from different tribes, from different areas, would you say that there is a the Iranian ethnic group, that they are, because you have the Arabs, all right? You have the Chinese, you have blacks, you have Indians, and so on.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Would you say that Iranians are a group upon themselves, or are they still a mixture between Turks and Mongols and blah blah blah?
I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but yeah, I think there is probably an awful lot of genetic mixture in that.
But I mean, it's the same with every group. That's like universal. I think in terms of is there like an Iranian ethnic family? Yes. But are they pure? No. They are. There's been lots of invasions. Would that be a way to sort of summarize it?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably more mixture there than, say, there is among the Japanese or the Chinese or the South Indians, for example.
So the Kurds, for example, have quite a mixed origin, surprisingly. So they seem to be. Or the Baluchis are another example. I mean, they speak an Iranian language, but they in terms of their ethnicity, it seems very mixed or confusing.
And then you have various tribes in Afghanistan and Central Asia who are, they look like Mongols and they speak an Iranian language, and
So there's definitely been some mixing. Anyway, I think we've come towards the end. So I think that was really good. I hope you guys listening found it really interesting. I found it. I mean, screw you guys. I found it interesting. That's all that matters.
If somebody wants to get in touch with you, do you have a homepage? Do you have an address if somebody wants to ask something specific?
So, there's a Facebook page which is kind of my research and reenactment. I'll type it out here for you, so you all know where to go. This is the link to it, and you can get in touch with me via that.
We'll link it. We'll put the link in the description box.
Sure.
Can I just say out loud whilst we're on air though the URL for your Facebook page so that people can find it if they say listening on the iTunes or whatever.
Sure.
Hold on. Let me just find your.
I've just posted it in the chat box. I don't know if that's visible.
Oh, brilliant!
No, I already put it in the comments.
Yeah.
It's Facebook.com. Era Nud Turan.
Yep, Eran ud Turan, which Middle Persian.
So I'll spell it. It's ERANUDTURAN.
Yeah, and I post various historical articles, various images, and of course all the photos, all the recreated stuff that I make on there. You can get in touch with me via that, and I'll answer any questions. There are a few topics we didn't get a chance to get into, but for anybody interested, they can look up. The two topics were things like the origins of Ayaran and Fatawa, sort of military chivalric codes, and the origins of the Ghulam soldiers via the Central Asian Sogdian Chakir system. But yeah, I mean, the information is quite easily findable, and I might make some online posts about them soon as well for those who are interested.
Well, thanks from me too.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, what I'm going to do before Klingschor lets us go, I'm going to read the Hadith of the day, as always provided by Allah Sakuru. And he says it's his favorite one, and it's actually quite a sick one, I think. It's from Bukhari. It's 762.58, and it's about Muhammad sitting somewhere, and a woman coming up to him. So, O Allah's apostle, I have come to you to present myself to you. So what that means is she's proposing marriage. Allah's apostle glanced at her. He looked at her carefully and fixed his glance on her and then lowered his head. So it seems he wasn't interested. So when the lady saw that he did not say anything, she sat down. I would have buggered off, but she doesn't really get the message. So a man from his companions got up and said, well, if you're not in need of her, then marry her to me. And the Prophet said, have you got anything to offer? The man said, no. The Prophet said, go to your family and find something. So, in other words, Muhammad is telling the guy, well, she came to me so that she wants to get married to me. I don't really need her. I don't think she's that great. So, if you want to marry her, you have to give something to me as a present so that I will then marry her to you. So the man goes off and he says, nah, I couldn't find anything. So Muhammad, this goes on backwards and forwards a couple of times. So Muhammad always sends him back and says, look, it doesn't matter, just give me something. Just any kind of token that you have given me something, because in Islam you need to pay for the woman that you want to marry. So anyway, this goes backwards and forwards, and then in the end he offers, well, I can give you the shirt, like the upper garment, and then I will give half of it to her, and then and then he says, what are you going to do with that? If you wear half, then she doesn't have half, and she's not properly covered, and so this doesn't work anyway. So then the guy says, well, I've got nothing, then I'm just going to leave. Then he says the Muhammad called him back, and then when he came back, the Prophet said, how much of the Quran do you know by heart? And the man replied, I know surah and this surah and that surah, naming some of the names. And the Prophet said, can you recite it? And he says, yes. He says, all right, then you're allowed to marry her for what you know of the Quran. That's how Muhammad was also in the matchmaker business. He would have Parship.com or lovelyhearts.com.
I just picture him going 0 out of 10 would not bang.
Great. All right. Next week we'll probably have another guest. I've been networking, and Haina Databoy, I hope I pronounced her name correctly. So I apologize if I haven't. Who is an American ex-Muslim, will come on to chat with us about sort of being an ex-Muslim in the USA, a comparison between the Muslim communities in the US and Britain comparatively, and sort of, I guess, Desi Muslim culture particularly, because she has a Desi or South Asian background. And also sort of ex-Muslim feminism and issues surrounding that. So it should be really interesting.
Feminism, wow.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. So we've had a great guest this time. Thank you very much for coming on, Nadeem.
Well, thank you for certainly a lot of fun.
No worries. And look, come on next time, guys, or tune in next time, as they say, and we'll have another guest and hopefully another interesting topic. So cool. All right, do your noise thing and take us out, Scott.